Roll call.
I don't know if it's just me, but Tony, I'm having a hard time hearing you. Just
Yeah.
FYI.
Oh, okay.
Can folks hear me okay? Okay. So I will go ahead and do roll call as folks roll in here. Jill Archer,
Present.
Commissioner Cruz, Caroline. Oh, I think Caroline's coming on right now. Caroline, are you there?
Yes.
There you are. Perfect. Commissioner Davis. No Eric yet. Commissioner Fuller.
Here.
Commissioner Hupy. No Frankie yet. Commissioner Jokinen. I see you there, Katie.
Okay.
I think you were just on mute.
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Okay,
Yeah.
present.
Awesome.
I'm present. I promise.
Maybe we're just all having sound issues today. Debbie Jones.
Yep.
Commissioner Knudsen.
Present.
Commissioner Loeffler. There's Eric. I see Eric is here.
Yes, present.
Hey, Eric.
Hey,
Moxie. No Moxie. Commissioner Mines.
Present.
Julia. Commissioner Minty. No Kelly yet. Commissioner Nordike.
I'm here.
Hi, Vanessa. Commissioner Obiero. I don't see Mike. Commissioner Pena.
I'm here.
Fernando. Judge Rigmaiden.
Present.
Judge. Representative Reynolds.
Here.
Thank you for joining us, Representative Reynolds. Senator Solman. No one from Senator Solman's office yet. Commissioner Vesna.
Yeah, I'm present. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay,
much
cool.
better. Thank you. And then from our OHA friends, I think Sam Byers is here for Ebony.
I am here. I'm here for the first hour, Annalise, and just going to check in with Krista too to see if she's joining.
Okay, and Krista sent me a message that she's going to join us today. So I will try and make sure we give her a chance to introduce herself. All right, we are good to go with roll call, Tony.
Awesome. Thanks, Annalise. So for today's meeting, we have a few things to go over. One, we're gonna review the recovery subcommittee's proposal to the opioid settlement board that happened last week, which I think was a unanimously approved, if I remember correctly. So thanks, Monta and the recovery subcommittee for working so hard on that. In addition to that, we're gonna hear a little bit more from our recovery service commissioners, recovery service providers that are commissioners about what they do and the importance of it. Then we'll do our kind of standard committee updates, and then we will preview the July 2024 progress report on the strategic plan. So that's our agenda for today, but we will start off with a director's report from Director Dolph.
Thanks, Tony. And I did ask that we kind of switch it up a little bit and hear from our commissioners who are recovery service providers first, and then hear from Monta on the proposal, just so we can kind of lay the groundwork. As a reminder, this is part of the feedback we received at the April meeting to make sure that everybody has a really good grounding and the subject matter expertise that we have on the commission itself. So next, remember, no meeting in July. I'll remind you at the end again. Have fun, take a summer vacation. When we come back in August, we will focus on treatment because that proposal is coming up next month to the settlement board. And so we'll be asking folks to share their treatment expertise at the next meeting. I am also really hopeful by the time we meet again that we're going to have new staff members. We have been spending a lot of time the past couple weeks interviewing folks. As you'll remember, since Tori moved over to OHA, we've got Tori's position, plus we have another policy advisor, a research analyst, and a communications specialist. So I'll be working to extend some offers over the next couple weeks. So we're very excited. We're going to have like a double in size team to support you guys going forward. So that's my biggest kind of update. House Bill 4002, you'll remember that we have kind of this longer term folding into our strategic plan, barriers to MOUD work. But we have the opportunity to present recommendations to the legislature this September. So Wes has been working with a small group of folks on developing some youth-focused recommendations, and the youth team will have an update later on when we do committee updates. And then we are also launching a MOUD emergency department, like bridge to community work group. We decided, consulting with Katie on the treatment committee, we decided that that is kind of a unique body of work. The Oregon Health Leadership Council has already started doing some work in this space and has already endorsed a model. So we're kicking that work group off on June 27th. If you are not on the list to be in that work group and you would like to be, let me know. We're going to meet, we're going to do 5 meetings every other week to get to recommendations in September. And then the treatment committee will be looking at that more holistically after we get through with the opioid treatment program recommendations that Katie will talk about later. I will also mention to folks, just because I think some folks may have seen this, that when Governor Kotek first came in, she asked agencies to do their own individual agency strategic plans for the agencies. And so our partner, our participating state agencies are finalizing those. Those are starting to roll out. We'll get those hopefully all in one place as we move into the next strategic plan. So far, they're pretty high level. I will give a call out. It's not finalized yet, but our partners at OLCC really made a concerted effort to call out their role in the ADPC strategic plan, which was very nice to have that there. And we're getting some good cross-agency collaboration happening with those, I will say, which is great. The governor's office continues to be working on the governor's budget for next year. Our ADPC in particular, our little tiny budget space. I need to get funding to make our limited duration staff that we're bringing on permanent, and continue for us to have a little bit of contracting money. So that's our kind of little piece there. And then we'll be talking this fall about our legislative concept that we've talked about a couple times now. So that's exciting. I think that's about everything. I did want to call out Tony, and maybe I'll drop this in the link of the many wonderful things that Tony does for the state of Oregon. He testified in front of the Senate Finance Committee after meeting Senator Wyden, as the story goes, in a grocery store. But it sounds, Tony, like maybe that wasn't actually, who knows, different memories of that. But Tony did a really great job. So I just really want to shout out for Tony, sitting amongst these super genius treatment professionals in Washington, DC, and doing an absolutely fantastic job. So thank you for that, Tony. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Tony, to kick off this kind of recovery services overview.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much. So, we have an hour. We can take less time than that, if we want, but really talking about the importance of recovery support services. And one thing that I will say, is that I'm involved nationally with Faces and Voices of Recovery. And so I meet with other recovery leaders across the United States. And I know we are critical of Oregon oftentimes, but in comparison to other states, like recovery support services in many ways is where Oregon shines, is actually pretty advanced to the way we fund recovery services, the amount of peers we have, and in some ways we pioneered it. So I just wanted to to let everybody know that as we move into the discussion around the importance of recovery support services. Now, Monta, am I able to kind of kick it over to you to kind of start us off? Is that cool?
Am I starting with the overview of the presentation for the opiate settlement board or just for recovery services?
No, we're just discussing recovery services right now.
Oh, okay. I didn't know I was part of that, but I
Oh
definitely
yeah,
have
I
things
didn't
to
know
say.
if you were gonna kind of talk about the importance of it and
Yeah,
like what you've
yeah,
been involved with and stuff over time.
yeah. I mean,
Think-
I just think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I hate to interrupt folks. I do have a point of order. So one of the other hats that I wear, I'm a Salem City Councilor, and we are receiving a portion of the opioid settlement funds, and we are doing our own council deliberations about how we spend those portion of funds. I don't know if it would be a conflict of interest for me to participate in further conversations about the opioid settlement, but I think in an abundance of caution, I would prefer to recuse myself from that portion of our conversation. So I just thought I would put my hand up and say pause before we have any further conversation during this meeting about that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And what I was saying, correct me if I'm wrong, Annalise, but I don't think there is any potential conflict of interest. We're not voting on anything today. We're not discussing how cities should use their funding, nothing like that. This is more just educational at this time. And then we will discuss our presentation to the state's opioid settlement board and what they funded. But at no time are we, going to make any sort of decision around how the city should spend their funds.
Does anyone have any concerns about me participating?
No, and just would hope that this presentation would better inform you on any decisions you'll make in the future with no expectations of how you make those decisions or what decisions you make.
Okay, great. Thank you. I feel much better.
Okay, so you kick it over to you, Monta. Maybe just
Sure,
kind of
sure. Yeah, sir. Thanks, Tony. I mean, just to start, when we think about recovery services, and I think back to my own personal experience of starting as a recovery mentor back in 2008, and with the kickoff of peer services, specifically across Oregon. When we think of, when I think about long-term recovery and how that plays into the continuum care of treatment services and housing services, I really think it's important that we focus and really call to attention that long-term recovery is absolutely germane to our success here in the state of Oregon in addressing our substance use disorder crisis that we have. And recovery services plays a huge part in that long-term support. I've been saying this a little bit more often lately about how long-term recovery supports is actually stepping in to help us solve our workforce shortages in the state of Oregon. And when we think about, the high percentage of folks that work in SUD services from peers, obviously, but also CADCs, case managers, and other supports within the continuum of care, those folks mostly identify as people in recovery. And so when we're investing long-term into recovery services, we are actually bringing in the new workforce that we need. And so it plays into this whole support that we need across the continuum of care, from detox services to treatment services, all the different ASAM levels. And so recovery is absolutely important. We say in recovery that one person who has experienced addiction and now stepped out of it is best suited to help those that are trying to get out and find their way in recovery. And that's what recovery services is about. It's about our workforce. It's about us stepping in and stepping up to help those just like others helped us. And so it's absolutely important. And I think you're right, Tony. I think with when we look at the work that we're doing, and specifically in peer recovery services across the state, we are doing some good work, and we are expanding our workforce. And so I'm really happy to see not only the expansion of services, but the support that we're getting from different funders across the state to make sure that we're ramping up and supporting recovery oriented systems of care. And so with that, I'll pass that on to the next person.
Cool. Thanks, Monta. I got Julia Mines up next, the executive director of Miracles Club. Now, Annalise, do you all have Julia's PowerPoint, or Karina? Maybe I should ask Karina.
Is that the PowerPoint that you sent me, Annalise?
I have not seen Julia's PowerPoint.
I wonder if you just sent it to me only. Oh, okay, Julia, I got it.
You want to forward it to Karina real quick?
Yeah, I can also run your PowerPoint if you want, Julia. What do you there, Julia? Okay, I just sent it to you.
Yes, I am.
Karina. You want me to run your PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, okay, Miracles, I got you.
All righty. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Can you see the PowerPoint?
Yeah. Can you put it on presentation?
Yes,
There
ma'am.
we go.
And I just
Well,
before Julie goes, I'll just say, Miracles has a soft spot in my heart because I went there in early recovery after getting out of treatment, and I went to meetings at Miracles. And while I was in all these meetings and stuff, I learned how to live life in a more spiritually grounded, principled fashion. And it was important for me to go and hear stories of people who had once been similar to me, involved in crime and out of jail, and then they had transformed their life and become these really esteemable members of society. And so just always want to shout that out, Julia.
thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm Julia Mines. I'm the executive director of the Miracles Club. And who we serve is not limited to, but our focus is on African Americans in recovery. So our motto is bringing a community together, one person at a time. Next slide. So what we do is we're building lives, restoring families, renewing. You can read that there. I'm not gonna read it for you, but the Miracles Club is a community club. We not only rent space for self-help meetings, but we also do for clean and sober events, such as like Juneteenth. We have a big celebration coming up. We have we do weddings. We do clean. I can't think of nothing. All kind of clean and sober events is what we do here. We rent our club out, and like right now, we have a week-long CRM training going on to get some more CRMs into the workforce. Next slide. So just a little interesting facts. So you can read it there. In the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, Black families became a crime. It was a crime to be a Black family with the father, traditional family, father, mother, and kids. Once a family was on welfare, whatever, the father could not be in the home. And that was devastating to not only to the families, but the communities that existed. And we all know about the history of Blacks in America. So that was part of it, the way to destroy Black families. In the 70s and 80s, where drugs were introduced and flooded into Black communities, where the Black communities were decimated, and the Latino communities at that also, the government would put, the history is there. And then the war on drugs, which mainly affected Black and Latino communities, was enacted, which really tore those marginalized communities up. Can you, Tony, see if you can get that that link to appear real quick?
Tony, you're on mute.
Can you hear the YouTube video?
Just click, Control click on that. You can't.
Well, I clicked it, it came up, but let me just see if I can share my other screen and then you can hear it. Well, now I do have a lot of tabs up, so don't be
Yeah.
judging me.
There you
Okay.
go.
All right, can you see the YouTube screen?
Yeah.
Okay, now can you hear it?
Can anybody hear that? No, we can't hear it.
No. Okay, well, I'll put it in the chat. I don't know how to
There
get
you
the
go.
audio.
Put it in the chat and then take a look. It's just a short little 3.5 minute clip about the war on drugs.
Yeah,
and
it's
how-
narrated by Jay-Z.
Yeah, it's really interesting for 3.5 minutes, all the work put into that clip about the war on drugs. So that being said, what housing African American drug related crimes, housing for us was not little to non-existent. And then recovery housing for recovering African Americans was definitely not something that was happening here in Oregon. So next slide. So what we do at Miracles, creating a culture of appropriate services. Since I have become the ED, we have a strong mentorship program here where mentors have 15, no more than 15 to 17 clients per caseload. We search for resources for our community. We have been awarded Measure 110, which most of our services are contingency management and financial assistance to our community. We have a clothes closet that we provide brand new clothes for. Not that saying that there's anything wrong with hand-me-downs, but we try to build people up. And so we go to Los Angeles and get the rock bottom wholesale prices for clothing and supply our closet. And people are kind of really appreciative. And we appreciate it too, letting people know that they're worth more than a hand-me-down. Next slide. And in the financial assistance, we do like rental assistance when necessary. You have to be engaged. We do, whatever you need. If you need clothes, laundry soap, whatever we can do to help you take that next step to actualization, to where you need to go. We're stepping stones rather than stumbling blocks. And then we talk about equitable housing for African Americans in recovery. We secure appropriate funding streams that complement our housing goals. So we not only provide housing at Miracles, but we also seek outside housing for the African American people that we serve. We create appropriate policies and procedures for housing. And we have some partners such as Bridges to Change, 4D, so many more. I'm pulling a blank. The sun has been frying my brain all weekend. So we prioritize referrals and intake processes, clear communications with referral sources and possible residents, so that we're very straightforward, so there's no misunderstandings about what we're doing, what housing is appropriate, what housing is available, and how you can get into it. So acknowledging the history, and we also always acknowledge historical and generational trauma that has happened to African Americans, not only in this country, but in this state. We're real clear about that. We bring it to the forefront, we talk about it, and we address it. And we work to build relationships and places and other places for housing for our folks. Next slide. So we have transitional housing. We're in partnership with Bridges to Change in our transitional housing. So to get into our transitional housing, you have to have a case manager or a PO that's going to support you in that housing. The limited stay is 6 months to a year. We don't charge any rent. And we what you have to do is establish a savings account once you get there after the first 3 months and put $300 away so that you'll have a nest egg when you're ready to move out. We verify your clean time and that you have to be clean and sober in the housing. And there's some programming that goes along with the mentor that you have to be engaged with your mentor or be in treatment and or be doing something in self-help to help you move forward. We don't want you to live in our housing and just stay stuck. Next slide. And so we also have permanent housing. We have 40 units above the Miracles Club and 41 units down at the Miracles Central. We're in partnership with Central City Concern. There's studio 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, and it takes verifiable clean and sober time, federal tax credit buildings, affordable rent, mandatory UAs, programs of recovery, and peer deliver services are always available to you in our housing, permanent housing. Next slide. And so for us, everyone is an expert in their own life. We don't go in, tell people how to do it, when to do it, or what to do. You choose your course of plan, and we help you stand on that. And we always have to listen to understand rather than listening to direct. And so a question was, how, I also heard Annalise in the email, how did I get into recovery? Where am I at? Well, I'm 26 years clean and sober. I started in Miracles in 1997. And Miracles was a place for me to be 5 days a week, 7 days a week, 5 meetings a day, just sit there all day long and until I began to get a life, because I came here out of prison and didn't have anywhere to go. My family had been displaced and all over the place. One of my children had been adopted out. One was in foster care, and they said that he was not adoption material. And so that just gave me, being at Miracles and communing with the folks there, learning what recovery was, helped me get on my feet. And I went from, how do they say, 5 meetings a week to 1 meeting a week to 3 meetings a week to barely no meetings a week. But this is after a 26-year stint getting a life and finding ways and means to get better at what I did. And a piece of this is that I went from no rent to some rent to home ownership. I went from riding a bike, catching the bus to a vehicle. But most of all, I went from being very introverted and no self-esteem to the person you guys meet today that has a voice and is not afraid to use it. So, you know, being in recovery has been a blessing for me. I use for at least 25 years. I've now been clean and sober longer than I used. I have a family, I have grandchildren, but you know, a piece of this, I do say that I'm the executive director of Miracles Club, but that is not my claim to fame. My claim to fame is that Miracles has afforded me a life. I've started here, I now sit at the helm, and there will be somebody that started here that will sit at the helm after I'm gone. So, you know, this is what recovery is, how we grow. You know, I have several partners, like I said, Tony, Fernando, Monta. These are the people that we reach and we coordinate with each other to provide services to our community. And my focus is on equity, inclusion, and diversity. So that's why you always hear me using my voice about what about the marginalized communities and what about this and what about that? How do we help these folks also? Because, and I always say this, and it's not a shame on anybody in this meeting, but we know that Oregon is a white supremacist state. And if we don't call it out, it won't get called out. So you gotta stand on, somebody told me when my first job in recovery, if you're not standing on something, you're falling for anything. So these are the principles that I stand on, that recovery is good and everybody can recover. And there's a part in the NA book, and I'm gonna quote this and shut up, that our message is anybody Anybody can use the desire to stop using, losing the desire to use, and find a new way of life, which is what happened for me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Julia. Appreciate that and everything you do. Fernando, I'm gonna pivot over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for having me to present. I do not have a PowerPoint. Anyone who knows me knows I'm not a big fan of PowerPoint. So a little bit about myself first. I'm a person in long-term recovery from an opiate use disorder. Actually, next month it'll be 18 years. Also in recovery from mental health, depression, PTSD, and also food addiction. And that's been a lifelong struggle that I will live with forever, I'm certain. I first moved to Oregon from New York City about 14 years ago now, and I began my career as a CADC working out in Washington County for LifeWorks, working with, at first it was all the Latino community out there because I was the only Spanish speaker, but then quickly focused in on youth and adolescents, child and family addictions, working a lot with gang members, and it really kind of moved my heart. Being from New York, culturally specific services are common. Everyone speaks Spanish. There's services for the African American community. Every community services are easy to find. And when I moved to Oregon, it was so shocking to me how the second largest demographic in the state basically had so few resources available. And so that pretty radicalized me to get involved in services that way. Eventually, I ended up working as a clinical supervisor over at Bridges to Change, and we opened up an IOP with housing program, which I was really proud of. Eventually a director, and then an opportunity arose with the Northwest Instituto Latino, our organization, founded in 2001 as a way to add more behavioral health professionals, culturally specific, linguistically specific behavioral health professionals to the continuum. Basically, there were not enough CADCs. CRMs didn't exist yet in 2001. So there were not enough CADCs to actually meet the need. So our founder reached out to MACBO and was like, we have to do something about this. And the goal was of increasing culturally and linguistically specific recovery support services for the Latino community in the Portland metro area by providing education and training opportunities. And then in 2001, with the support of MACBO, Bridges to Change, 4D, and we got a small grant to start doing direct services. So I moved from a board member of the Instituto providing conferences and education to actually the operations director. And in February of 2021, February 7th, about 11 days before the giant ice storm, we opened our front door. We had 15 community support groups the first week that we opened. The community came out and rallied behind us. And over the past 3 years, we've grown to have 2 locations. So we have our Southeast Portland Recovery Drop-In Center, and we have a temporary office in Beaverton, but by the end of the summer, we'll have another recovery drop-in center in Hillsborough, downtown Hillsborough. Over the past 3 years, we've had roughly 20,000 people walk through our doors, now plural. And that's including about 3 to 5 new people every day that walk through the door seeking services. We do not advertise. Word of mouth is our best advertisement, and the community speaks and they let everyone know, hey, you can go over there and find a friendly face that understands the language of the community. And you know, one of the wonderful things about recovery support services and the model that we support is that we do not bill Medicaid, so we don't have to check insurance. We don't have to check people IDs. We don't have to make sure that they have immigration or documentation status. We can literally help anyone that walks through the door. And similar to Miracles, like Julia said, we'll help anybody that comes to our door. This is a welcome place for them to be. Our specialty is obviously the Latino community with the focus on monolingual Spanish speakers. But we've had plenty of people who felt more comfortable coming to services with us, and we just support them with those services. Within those 20,000 roughly people that have come through the door, over the past 24 months, we've had 635 that have specifically enrolled in individual peer mentor services. And those people, with those folks, we have about a 78% 6-month follow-up, so they're staying engaged. And then we have about a 68% 1-year follow-up for those clients as well. And the really cool thing with our services, you guys will hear me say this all the time. We have 1 residential treatment program for Spanish-speaking men in the state of Oregon. We have 0 residential treatment programs for Spanish-speaking women in the state of Oregon. In Multnomah County currently, and in Washington County, we have 1 IOP program for Spanish speakers. So we have lots of people that are out there desperately needing services that aren't able to get them in as far as the treatment setting goes. So we are filling in a huge gap at our recovery center in the network, and connecting people to services, but also people are just being successful without going into treatment services, which is something we're very proud of as well. I like to say we get to meet people on their worst day. You know, we have a harm reduction street outreach program, which currently has about 60 clients that are just engaged with a harm reduction outreach peer. And we see them as often as we can using contingency management to continue to engage them in services. And we see a lot of those people 3 or 4 months in, they start asking, hey, maybe I do want to go to detox, or maybe you can kind of help get me into housing. And so we're kind of just starting to connect them, plug them into the system and get them engaged in services. We have, let's see, I mentioned those. Another really cool thing, as I mentioned, that we do is educational programs for the Latino community. And so since 2017, when our organization, in collaboration with Multicultural Associates and MACBO, for the first time, translated and enculturated the Certified Recovery Mentor certification training into Spanish. And then about 2 years ago, we did the same thing with the peer wellness specialists. And now we're working on the CADC in Spanish, culturally, linguistically specific. We've trained 500 new Latino behavioral health workers. So we are a net exporter of talent into the behavioral health system at this point. And this is all through our little scrappy startup that is basically a recovery community center, but it's also just becoming kind of a recovery hub, which is a term that you guys are going to start hearing a lot more of. Let's see. One of the other big questions that Annalise had asked us to talk about was what to know about the strategic plan as we move forward. I think you heard me say it kind of around the edges, but I'll just say it directly. Recovery community centers, recovery drop-in centers, they can play a vital role in supporting the overall recovery network of the state. You know, treatment is, obviously you guys are all subject matter experts to some degree or another in here. Treatment is a very important piece of the puzzle, but it is not the only piece of the puzzle. It's not even the most important piece of the puzzle. Treatment is a very direct intervention to stabilize someone and get them ready to continue to move forward into recovery. The way I like to describe it is that it's like giving someone metformin for diabetes, but what they also are going to need is how to manage their lifestyle and those lifestyle changes. And that's something that recovery community centers, recovery stop-in centers can do. We can stick with people because we're not billing Medicaid currently. We can stick with people for years. Our first cohort of people that came through our programs are now workers in the field. They have gotten their CRMs, they're working on their CADCs, and so now they're just working, helping people. And that's all through the power of this model that we have. It's funny because our system is so skewed towards diagnosis and treatment and Medicaid billing that sometimes it's hard to get people to kind of understand how this model works. But like Julia pointed out, we are able to directly communicate with the communities that we are meant to serve and then meet those specific needs for them. We're more nimble. We can open a lot faster for a lot less money. And we are a value added to the overall system. And so I'll end my comments. So I guess for the strategic plan is that we continue to prioritize developing these and trying to launch them in all the counties around the state. And then from there, using those that we launch in some of the more rural, difficult to launch places, and then use those as hubs to continue to grow services. While the treatment system, which takes a lot longer to build out, we can buy the system some time. And so that's, if you start thinking strategically long-term, we are steps. We are the foundation on which the larger system can be built at the recovery drop-in center model. And so with that said, I'll open it up for any questions, if anybody has one, or any comments or anything. If not, I'll give it back to Tony.
Okay, thanks, Fernando. So, you know, at 4D Recovery, we're what nationally is known as a recovery community organization. In Oregon, what's typically known as a peer-run organization, which basically means it's an organization run by people in recovery. And you know, these have actually been around a while, and there's been a lot of advocacy towards funding these kind of services. You heard Fernando reference outside of Medicaid. And one of the important differences between treatment and long-term recovery support services in general, this is nuanced, is in treatment services, you know, an individual is diagnosed and given a prescription of care, you know, that's most normal or historically focused on addressing kind of acute symptoms of the person's diagnosis, which is great. That worked really well for me. I'm coming up on 12 years, you know, sobriety here next month, and I needed, you know, treatment services. Historically, what's happened is people went to community-based, you know, volunteer-run recovery support services, different variations of 12-step meetings, very, you know, basically over time, over the long haul. And there's been a emergence of a multi kind of pronged approach to advancing recovery services through the professionalization of peer supports, through funding models, through the science, you know, and academic research around recovery services. Most of all the academic research and science historically has been around the, you know, causation of addiction and the treatment of the acute symptoms. There has not been a lot of research done on what is the long-term impact of recovery. You know, what happens when a person gets into recovery? What sort of impact does that have to their family, et cetera? There just hasn't been a lot of research done on that, but there's starting to be more and more research done. The Recovery Research Institute is doing a ton of research around recovery, which is awesome. So 4D provides, you know, peer-based recovery support services. We focus on adolescents and young adults. I've been working at 4D for over 10 years. I got involved in it very early in my recovery. It's been a great experience for me. One thing that you'll know about a lot of recovering people is that they kind of bond together, almost like they survived some sort of war or something. I don't know. It's like you survived this thing, and so you all band together. So you'll hear them talk about it in that way. Like, I survived my addiction. I'm in recovery. And that's what you'll hear when you go to recovery meetings. There are these stories of overcoming this horrendously difficult part of their life. And what I've seen in Oregon, which is really awesome, is that what was done in just the community base, like 12-step meetings and stuff of one addict helping another addict recover, has been one professional organization helping another professional organization develop. So like Miracles Club, for example, when I first started running 4D, I went down there. Julia wasn't running it, but I went down there when I was trying to get my first contract from Multnomah County, and I asked Miracles for help, and they gave me their contract so I could review it before I applied for the county. And then, you know, Monta has helped 4D develop, and then we helped Instituto, and then Fernando helped 4D, and we helped Miracles, and Miracles helps us. And so it's this really kind of synergistic approach, which is really, really great. And then we all advocate for each other for the most part, although we do have differences of opinions around certain issues. But we all stick together, you know, for the most part. Another important part of recovery services is kind of outreach and engagement, especially at 4D. So we do a lot of outreach and engagement. We go out into the community, do street outreach, go into treatment centers, like go all over the place and try to help people either initiate their recovery process or sustain their recovery process. So think of pre-treatment and post-treatment engagements. You know, so you can get people started in the recovery process, and then you can help them achieve long-term recovery. And research shows that if you can help people get to the 5-year recovery mark, that the likelihood that they're going to lapse back into acute symptoms drops a lot. And so recovery services are really, really important. Similar to Bridges to Change, 4D started out as a peer-run organization primarily, and then we're expanding. So we're a recovery organization that's expanding into clinical services. And you also see clinical services expand their portfolio to do recovery services. And so it's just been a really, really awesome thing to watch the system attempt to provide the long-term chronic care that a lot of people with substance use disorder will need. The last thing that I'll say is that the cool thing about a lot of recovery support services is this advocacy component to the organization, where they're not only out trying to advocate for their own bottom line, you know, of their organization, they're out advocating for all people in recovery, basically, or all people with substance use disorder, trying to change the systems. That's been a really cool part of working in the recovery sector, is just this advocacy component. I think, you know, having a specific group of individuals advocating in the strategic plan for the expansion of recovery services is very, very important. There seems to be a lack of professionals who could do the recovery service work right now, and there needs to be a lot of infrastructure built. So it'll be interesting, I think, in the strategic planning process, at least the next iteration of that, of taking a more nuanced perspective around operationalizing our recommendations. The last strategic plan was really great in how it outlined a lot of the interventions that we need, and some of the strategies to get there in a really broad basis, but it didn't talk about how do we implement these things? What's the timeline? What are the funding opportunities that best support the work, right? Because it's not just one funding bucket. And I've seen a really cool things from like Care Oregon and different CCOs on ways to use Medicaid funds to actually support recovery services and their goals. And at one time, I was really against any sort of Medicaid funding until I was educated on how it could be used by my friend Jill Archer. So appreciate the fact that we got to share a little bit of our own recovery and a little of the professional work we've done. And I'd just like to open it up to any other commissioners to talk about your own experience, if you would, around your recovery journey, or your own experience around funding recovery services, the importance of them, etc. And I think we have about 20 minutes before we pivot and go into our opioid settlement recommendation section of the agenda. Caroline Cruz, go ahead.
Thank you, Julia, Fernando, and Tony. I think your words are very, very powerful, and I like Tony talking about a 5-year recovery. What we used to do in Warren Springs, and I'm not doing a lot of the direct services because administration takes too much time, but I do know that we used to count the time between relapse, and the fact that we did not want to tell people that they did not successfully fail treatment because they relapsed, and the fact that the longer they could stay from lapsing, that we praised them for that. And so sometimes they made it 2 years, sometimes they made it a week, and you are totally correct that they could pass that 5-year mark. The chances of them relapsing was diminished. So that's very, I think it's kind of consistent in some of the research that we've done, but it has never really been, studied or even printed somewhere that this is valid. But this is the same type of information. So I'm just so glad, Julia, and hearing what you guys been doing specifically with the with the Black, culture, because it's very important. I did used to work for the Addictions and Mental Health Division. And I do know there was a lot of effort in terms of reaching a lot of communities. I do know, Fernando, we had a very strong Chicano group, but this is way back in the 80s. I mean, I cannot believe it's like 40 years later, and it feels like we're always reinventing the wheel over and over again. But I just want to, again, tell you how powerful the three of you have shared your, recovery. And like Julia said, you're very introverted in the past, and now you want to use your voice for others. And I think that's what's very beneficial. I do see that movement within the Native American population, is the fact that once we became proactive instead of reactive, that we actually began to get a little bit further ahead in our efforts. So I applaud all three of you, and it really touches my heart to know that you guys are staying with your recovery, because over the years I have seen so many folks who have lost, faith. And I think the commonality that the three of you guys talked about is the fact that you cannot do this by yourself. You really need that support group around you, because for some of you guys, your own families have given up, and your new family becomes other people in recovery. So I just want to say thank you to all three of you.
Thanks, Commissioner Cruz. Appreciate that. Other commissioners want to chime in? Jill, go ahead.
I just want to reflect, that was really powerful, hearing all of you. And, likewise, I think I personally in our organization have learned a ton from working with folks like you, like Monta and Tony and Fernando. And I think we are really fortunate to have the flexibility that we do under this a couple of different waivers, so that we can fund more recovery support. I know when I started, it didn't seem possible, to fund things that weren't more kind of traditional treatment focused. And I feel like we've come a long way in this state in terms of what our ability is, and our recognition of the critical importance of funding the whole system of care, and not just the treatment part, but the pre-treatment, post-treatment, long-term recovery. So just thank you.
Thanks, Jill. Eric, go ahead.
Yes, excellent presentation. I really appreciate you guys sharing and sharing your experience too. It helps me relate as well, a little bit more. I have a couple questions. So I have two questions. First, I have one for Julia. I wanted to find out if Miracles is connected or working on or applied for the HRSN funding. I think that would be just a great opportunity for you guys to seek out, given the services and the population you serve. I think it's a great resource for you. Is that something you guys have already looked into or are looking into?
Say that again?
It's a health-related social needs grant. It's
the door closed on us.
Mm.
My person that does our grants was out in a training, and so the door closed on us. Yeah.
So
unfortunately.
So I think there's going to be multiple opportunities. So definitely
Absolutely. When it
seek
comes
that out
yeah.
in the next year. I think that would be just a great resource. Just really excited to see what's happening with Miracles. I wasn't aware they had housing services available now. So that's pretty exciting.
And we were part of SB 1530. So we got a grant from the county to purchase a home, and SB 30 allowed us 2 other homes, and we're in the inspection processes on all 3 of those right now. So we'll have 3 houses standing up soon for more transitional housing.
That's great. Thanks, Julia. And then Fernando, I had a question for you as well. You mentioned about the CADCs being offered. I think you said something about the application or something, some kind of training in Spanish. I didn't quite catch all that information. I was wondering, is it now an option for individuals who are applying for their CADC to be able to take the test in Spanish as well?
That is a better question for MACBO, but to my understanding, the answer is currently yes. And that is probably, Tony, right over the past year, maybe that's happened.
Ever since, yeah, you all started demanding it. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically what had happened was prior to 2000, literally the founding of our organization was our founder, Bernardino de la Torre. Some of you might know him. He still works in Washington County. He was working as a CADC, and he was literally the only Spanish-speaking CADC for the county at that point. I was that person at one point in my career as well. And so he reached out to MACBO and was just like, this cannot stand. And so they created a cohort. The training was still in English, but they did a culturally specific cohort where they could, they can use some cultural, they could do it in Spanish by still calling it the same thing in English. They certified about 15 people, most of them who went on to work. And then that was actually the founding of the organization. And we just did a conference for years and years to help those folks get their CEUs, to keep their licenses. In 2017, we translated and acculturated into Spanish, actually, the CRM. And then in 2021, 2022, early 2022, we launched the Peer Wellness Specialist. We've been fighting for years at this point to have a Spanish language CADC certification training, and that launched the first group that graduated from that. There was 20 of them. Was, I believe, when was that, at least, that we went to that graduation? Was that like last summer, probably like late September, maybe?
I think it was
Something
last
like
fall.
Yeah, last fall. And so those people we've added to the system. But unfortunately, because of the lack of actual culturally specific programs for Latinos, a lot of those people aren't working. Because there's not places that are hiring them. The biggest issue we have right now is that they need supervisors who speak the language, who are bilingual, which can be the biggest struggle we have. So thank you for those questions.
Yeah, no, that's I mean, that's phenomenal. You know, I don't know of any other licensing board that has it set up. I know specifically the social work board, surprisingly, is really behind in that manner. So it's really exciting to see you guys open those doors to that. So thank you for your work, all three of you.
Thanks. Anyone else want to chime in? Their
I just
personal.
wanted to,
Oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
Tony, real quick. I just wanted to, I kind of touched on this a little bit. This came up during the opioid settlement board package. These types of services launch quickly. They can frequently be open in 6 to 12 months. And they can be done for maybe a quarter of the administrative burden and cost of opening a formal treatment service. And so as we build the strategic plan, we really need to highlight that the ADPC gaps analysis says we need 145, and we have what, Tony, 8 of these across the state right now. And so there's just this gaping hole that needs to be put in there, and that we just need to kind of stand on the data that we have that shows that we need these more and that they're an effective service. So I just wanted to really emphasize that.
I mean, the last thing I would just say on that is, you know, thinking just from a finance lens and trying to tell our story and the importance of recovery centers, recovery hubs across the state, the return on investment. When we think about the front end investment of folks that are entering through detox and treatment, the long term and protection of that investment is important. Obviously, with the ongoing care of those individuals, but like Tony had pointed out, you know, the research shows that folks that make it to the 5-year mark have I think a 15%-ish reduction or chance of recurrence of use. And so we want to protect and keep those folks moving through their recovery. And it really supports the return on investment on all those services on the front end as well.
Thanks, Monta. Krista, is that right, Krista Jones?
Yes, thank you so much, Tony. Hi, everyone.
You're welcome.
Jones from Behavioral Health, Deputy Director. I've been listening on the phone, and sorry that I haven't been able to get on video quite yet, but I really appreciate and I'm always inspired by the emphasis on the workforce development through peer and recovery work. And I'm just kind of curious, given that folks who are in recovery, there is associated trauma working with individuals who are going through on that pathway towards recovery in their journey. And I'm just wondering, based on the amazing work that y'all do, are there specific things that we could think about differently to support a workforce that is in recovery, that's coming with, significant trauma potentially, and just struggles in that day to day, on top of the stress and strain of the work?
Yeah, a great question. And there was a peer supervision best practice manual that was developed by Eric Martin and several other professionals in the field. That is a really good resource for how do you support peers and supervise them in different settings, and one of the considerations is, I think, you have increased supervision and support because you're asking people to walk this delicate line around ethical boundaries. On the one hand, we want to share our personal experience as a way to generate motivation, right, and inspire somebody to change. But when you're sharing your personal experience, you start to become more personable, and so you need a lot of support on how do you manage these kind of ethically compromised situations. So that's one way. A lot of trauma-informed sort of care and practices when it comes to supervision, a lot of encouraging stuff like that is stuff we found that is important. One thing that we've done at 4D is, due to the low hours of training required to become a peer, we incorporate our own extended training sort of program over several month period, where we shadow, make sure people are good, meet certain benchmarks before they go out in the field alone. So thanks for bringing that up. Julia, go ahead.
So I might be repeating a little, but yeah, our work pool is so low, and trying to keep people in the field, there's a lot of turnover because of the fact that there's not a lot of training, whereas a CADC has to do 157 hours of training and then a year of practicum and so on and so forth. It's harder for our peers because I sit on the board of MACBO, and most of our ethics complaints are about CRMs and the ethics that they break. And so, not saying that we want the hours to the training to be longer, but we want to be able to provide that supervision for these folks so that they don't get themselves into trouble. You put them right into the field, and everybody wants to be a CRM, but then they don't understand what that really looks like, because their role is different than a CADC. Their role is to walk beside somebody instead of sit across a desk from them. And so those are the struggles that happen. And, there's a CRM2 training for to become supervisors, but you gotta have the experience to do this. And it's hard to have folks that want to help people, but don't know how to. And then they go in as if I'm a friend or I'm this, but that's not your role. You're not a friend. And yeah, some of the horrific ethics complaints that come across us is just like, oh my God. And Tony knows I'm one, off with their head. If they read the same ethics I did, and they off with their head, right? But that's different, but that's really not fair, right? Because I've had 20 years of training, but still the issue is signing off on ethics when you haven't really read it.
Yeah,
when you get into that gray area or that black and white area, it's hard.
Yeah, just one more thing. One thing that has been a double-edged sword, then I'll get you, Monta, is that there used to be a Oregon rule that required 2 years of abstinence before you could become certified. In some ways, it acted as a safeguard, you know, to help people kind of stabilize in their recovery, become independent before they went into the field, right? And so what happened when that rule got repealed is that more people got into the workforce, which is great, right? But at the same time, it put this onus on a lot of providers to do a lot of professional development for people who are in really early recovery. And a lot of, I don't want to say everybody, but a lot of people in early recovery are really dependent on the social model of recovery, where they're hanging out with people in recovery. For me, I went through high school. I went to my first prom at like 27 years old, you know, at like an NA dance and stuff. So I was still very much like redefining who I was and, you know, hanging out in a very social way. And so providers are figuring out, okay, how do we bring people in? Maybe they're even still getting some services and then help them develop professionally and make sure that they're not going to engage in unethical conduct, which is going to hurt their career over the long term. Monta, last words, and then I'm going to move us on.
Sure. The last thing I would just add to that conversation is that we also need to make sure organizations need to make sure that we're using our peers appropriately, especially with the increased acuity levels that we're seeing in the community. Peers are not the end all be all use to solve all the issues we have in the community. And there seems to be more peers than everybody else. And so we're tossing, the system seems to be tossing peers at to solve all the issues. And so to really protect our workforce and to protect the individuals that we're trying to serve, we need to make sure that peers are being used per their training and bringing in those higher level clinical supports in partnership, usually where needed to wrap around a person.
Yeah, thanks, Monta. Yeah, the popularity of peer support, you know, it really took off where peers can just do everything for a considerable subsidized cost comparatively to clinical staff. So yes, we need to be mindful. Thanks, Monta. So really glad to have you here, Krista. Thanks for jumping on and asking questions. And again, I just want to, you know, plug OHA. I know OHA gets a lot of criticism, you know, for stuff. They get, you know, all the criticism, none of the props, but a lot of the staff at OHA have really pioneered some really cool peer support services and spent a lot of money on peer support compared to other states. So give OHA its kudos today and as far as this discussion goes. Monta, I'm going to pivot back over to you.
Sure.
To just briefly go over the recovery committee recommendations to the settlement board.
Sure. Well, first off, I just wanted to thank the recovery community and the staff that helped us kind of work through internally our recommendations and also present to the opiate settlement board, which, as Tony pointed out in the beginning of the call, that it was unanimously accepted. And so I think someone's going to bring up a PowerPoint here, and I'll go over our recommendations that that we presented to the board. And why that's coming up, just to also underscore what Fernando said earlier, the gap analysis, the OHSU gap analysis showed that we needed 145 recommended community recovery centers. And I think we have 8, but with this proposal, we will be adding 5 more to fill the gap slowly.
I think Karina's pulling up the slides. And Monta will start off on slide 3, Karina.
Okay, so the recovery community or the recovery committee wanted to focus on 3 areas. We wanted to fund and expand community recovery centers. We wanted to have a housing impact as well, and also make sure that we were bringing in the expansion of culturally specific and youth recovery services. So the first thing we did with the recovery community centers is our team took a look at some of the data, and we looked at the 5 counties that had the highest opiate-related fatal overdose rates. And with that, we chose to focus on those 5 counties, which was Wasco, Curry, Douglas, Josephine, and Klamath counties. So for that, we wanted to put out recovery centers in each one of those counties prior to the to the recommendations that we put forth to the board. We received 3 viable proposals. One was from Gorge Recovery Center for Wasco County, and that was and all 3 of these are all 5, but 3 that are in play right now are for 36 months. So Gorge Recovery Center is going to launch a recovery center out in Wasco County. And then that was for $2 million. And then Bay Area First Step Recovery for $2.3 million to launch recovery center out in Curry County. And then Painted Horse Recovery is going to be working out in Douglas County, and their proposal came in at 2.3 and some change. For that, we were unable to receive proposals for both Josephine and Klamath counties. And so from what I understand, the board did approve the funding for those 2 counties, and we'll be working to receive proposals in those areas in the coming weeks that could end up going out to RFP from what I understand through OHA. But the recovery committee will still be reviewing those proposals as it stands. The second area that we wanted to focus was to have some kind of housing impact. And with not a lot of money to work with, we received a proposal from Oxford House. And what they proposed was they have current funding structures in place to launch and open up Oxford houses, focusing on these 5 counties that we identified with the recovery centers. What they need is they need administrative support in terms of personnel that is going to be able to reach out to these areas to obviously find houses and stand them up through their normal funding structure. So we funded them $500,000 to do that work. And this gave us a larger reach than just opening up houses ourselves because of Oxford's model and because their existing funding that's in place. This allows us to have a greater reach to create more beds in these areas. The last area for expansion of culturally specific and youth recovery services, prior to the presentation, we hadn't had specific proposals that were ready to move forward yet, but the Opiate Settlement Board did agree to fund $830,000 to expand culturally specific services and youth services. So just like the other 2 counties that we were unable to identify providers, we'll be working with OHA, and the recovery committee on the ADPC will be reviewing proposals. I think we have one in play right now to take a look at services to meet the need of culturally specific services and youth services. Our total ask was $13,080,000, and as far as I know, everything was approved. So those are the proposals that we put forward. We had a lot of good questions during our presentation, but overall it sounded like the board was very excited for the work that we were able to get done, and how we're going to be able to contribute to the work that needs to be done in our communities.
Annalise, go ahead.
And so Manta, if you want to go into more details, the next couple slides have that, or we can take it down and answer questions for folks. Just a couple of things I want to add. One, just a point of clarification: the 5 counties have high overdose rates with no current recovery community center capacity. So I think that was sometimes confusing with the board, that they were like, well, we have a recovery center. And we're like, yes, we're trying to fund it in the areas that have no recovery centers. I will also note, I think, in all transparency, as we work through this settlement board process and determining like ADPC's role and OHA role and the settlement board role, this was probably the stickiest one we've had so far. Like the prevention committee, they asked that it go back to the recovery committee to kind of work through it more with OHA. So I think we're going to kind of continue to walk this line between what are our recommendations as a commission for strategies and how to divvy up money and where we get the best bang for our buck, as opposed to us coming with contract terms, which sometimes it was a little pushed up against that a little bit with the settlement board. So just want to recognize that. And Monta did a fantastic job answering questions.
Yeah, thank you, Annalise. Thanks for clarifying that as well. Erica?
Yeah, I'm kind of familiar with Oxford House, their model, but I was just curious with this, is this like one Oxford House per each of those 5 locations, or how many beds, how many housing, you know, what, do you have a quantity on that? Was that part of it?
Yeah, we didn't get a specific amount of, or how many houses they were going to be able to open. But from what I understand, it could definitely be more than one house per county because of the
I
other
think
funding they
that's-
have in place. Yeah.
I think that's a fabulous just partnership for a lot of bang for your buck, 500
Yeah.
grand. I mean,
Yeah.
so well
That's
done.
that's what we thought too. Thank you, Erica.
And the details, Karina, can you go to slide 5? I think that has some more detail. Yeah, like, I guess that's actually still pretty high level, but they did quantify exactly how many staff it would pay for and what each staff would be doing in order to secure additional houses.
That's correct. It was a total of 5 staff.
And they've had similar proposals with other states around opioid settlement funds too.
Is there any other questions? Is there another slide, or is this was all just the high level still overview?
There's one more slide after this one on the youth and culturally specific services.
Yes, and like I said, the provider or providers of these services is still TBD. Fernando.
Yeah, a couple things. As far as this particular part of the proposal, don't be surprised if those of us who are part of the ADPC start getting asked about who might be funded, right? Isn't that what we agreed upon, Annalise, that OHA and ADPC would kind of work together even for this 830,000, so that there's still a way for us to keep investing in a targeted way, which was the larger comment I wanted to make. A lot of you know I'm one of the few people that's on both the ADPC and on the opioid settlement board. And this way of working together seems to be really beneficial. And it feels at least to me that those of us on the settlement board are really liking having kind of more targeted suggestions on how to spend the money. I don't know what your opinion on that is, Annalise, but it seems to be working really well. Like, I feel like it's working really well. And it feels like the board members feel like it's working really well. So I hope you guys are feeling like it's working well and know that it's very much appreciated. So.
Yeah, if we can go to the next slide, it actually has the language of the motion that was approved. And so that last paragraph kind of has some of that working together in collaboration language. So Will is going to be connecting, Will is the staff to the recovery committee. Will's going to be connecting with OHA staff to figure out next steps to get our input then on those last 2 counties and the culturally specific formula, it seemed like, Fernando, was kind of what that was sounding like, since there's only a few of you.
Yeah. The language is clear that it's going to be identified by the ADPC recovery subcommittee in collaboration with OHA.
Hello, this is Moxie Loeffler. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we
Yes,
can,
Moxie,
Moxie.
yes.
Oh, good. I'm driving, so I was having a little trouble with my phone controls. My main concern with regards to recovery housing has been that I've seen several patients who were harmed because their drug testing was interpreted by people with no medical training, and specifically medical providers. Even in primary care in the hospital, I have colleagues who ask me to help them interpret drug testing because it's so complex. So I've seen some patients who have been evicted from recovery housing based on faulty interpretations of their test results, or they were over tested, and partly because they were probably being socially excluded and bullied by fellow members of the sober houses. So I'm wondering what we can do to make sure that the medical testing is only interpreted by medical providers, so that we're not funding systems that charge money and then harm patients. Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Moxie. I can speak for housing organizations that that I've worked with. Specifically, I think best practice and what we did over at Bridges is we make sure that we're sending out your analysis tests to GCS them to make sure we're getting those interpretations from the laboratory and not just dip tests where untrained staff are making determinations based on a quick UA sample rather than letting the lab determine, especially when you get into areas where you can get false readings on opiates because of like poppy seeds and other medications that can come up. That's where the GCS testing really comes in to pull out that information to get accurate information around your analysis results. I wouldn't say that's best practice across all providers at this point, but I know that folks that are NAR certified, the NAR certified housing providers, were really working hard to make sure we have good checks and balances there to protect individuals.
Yeah, that's helpful to know. I think one of the complexities there is that on chromatography and mass spec testing, the confirmatory tests, you would expect a positive opiate and morphine and codeine to come back on poppy seeds. And so even on like poppy seed muffin or bagel consumption, like someone without medical training shouldn't really be interpreting those tests. Thanks.
Thank you for your question.
Other questions? Okay, well, I will move us on and just want to reiterate to Annalise, Fernando, and then the recovery subcommittee members. Like, great job. I know you put in a lot of work to get this done and to get everything done. And also Will, I forgot to mention Will, who did an incredible amount of work on this. Like, thank you so much, Will, for all the work you put in, both on the data analytics piece and setting up our framework to identify which geographic locations we wanted to fund, but also just on the logistical piece of working with all the different providers, recovery subcommittee members and stuff, getting everything ready to go. Thank you very much. No worries, Eric. I hope everything goes well for you. Do you have time really quick, Eric, just to give an update on harm reduction or no? I am pivoting us over. And Karina, could you stop sharing? Did we lose him? I think we might have lost him. Okay. No worries. And we will go with Debbie. We're going to move into committee updates. Debbie, do you want to give an update on the prevention subcommittee?
Sure. Where we're kind of moving forward with the biggest things regarding, especially the opioid settlement funding that we're very grateful to receive. Just let the ADPC group know. We are working with OHA for ambassador meetings, and that will, I think we have 4 people from each entity, which includes CLO, which is Coalition of Local Health Authority. I know I'm not getting that right. As well as ADPC members, the Opioid Settlement Board, and Addictions and Mental Health Planning Advisory Council. And I think I said our subcommittee. So those we're going to, I believe, are scheduled for 4 2-hour meetings between June and July. That will go on. The meetings have already started regarding the training of the workforce. We're able to turn that over a little bit quicker. So that one is happening, but that's what we've been spending a big bulk of our time. And as we get into our meetings for this month, we're really starting to look at that strategic plan and how primary prevention will fit into that. And we'll start having more documents to go in with that. That's what I got.
Thanks so much, Debbie. Monta, do you want to go ahead and go next?
Monta's just talked enough today.
Monta disappeared. Okay, no worries. We'll move over to Katie.
I'm here again.
Okay.
Thank you. And also, am usually first, so I appreciate the reprieve of not being the first committee chair to speak. I appreciate that. Okay, so treatments. We are super close to getting our recommendations together. So what we have so far is the 1.3 million per medication unit for one-time startup for either a mobile unit or facility costs for like a satellite facility. We have our guiding principles, which surrounds, jails, hospital, community provider collaboration, pay median. So for the metro region, this has been a lot of discussion on the metro region. So Oregon City, rural Clackamas County, and in one additional area that we are going to meet for our committee soon and discuss which third area for the metro region. And then the 7 units in the non-metro region, so 2 in Eastern Oregon, 1 in Mid-Gorge region, 1 in Klamath, and 2 underserved coastal area, and then in Eastern Lane County. Did I get it all? Okay. And then, as Annalise had said earlier, we are creating a separate MOUD to focus, I'm so sorry, a separate work group to focus on MOUD interventions and EDs. Did I miss anything? I probably did.
The one little on the
I knew it.
the treatment, and this is in front of the treatment committee this Wednesday, so none of this is final. But we added in a proposal for a little bit of money for the settlement board to go to OHSU to do training and technical assistance for jails. We're really trying to roll this out in conjunction with additional funding that's going to jails for MOUD, and try and make that kind of work together at the community level.
See, I knew that. That was really just a test, and at least to make sure you knew that. So, hey, you're welcome.
Thanks, Katie.
You passed. Thank you, Tony.
Hey, no worries. Thank you so much. Annalise, do you want? Oh, never mind. Representative Reynolds, do you want to hop in real quick?
Yeah, I just had a question, and I'm sorry if I missed this. I'm just wondering if there's any way to prioritize or thought about prioritizing treatment for people who are pregnant or who are parents of little babies. you know, as a pediatrician, the number one reason why kids are placed in foster care is because of parental substance use disorder. I know that's not new news to anyone here, but if there's any, you know, if there's any thought about trying to prioritize that, I will say I'm going down to Medford at the end of July to look at the Oasis program, which was just featured on OPB actually. So I'll be going down there and meeting with them. And I think, you know, State Rep Pam Marsh is like, let's just make that statewide. But anyway, just curious thoughts on room for that.
Here's what I'll say, like this first tranche of money, you know, between us and the settlement board, it was pretty specific, but that's a defined, I'm losing my words here, but in Exhibit E for the settlement, services for pregnant and parenting individuals is defined as a tranche of funding. So it's absolutely something that it could be used for as we move into that next area and start to identify those priorities. And that is a priority in the strategic plan too.
Thanks. And as far as I know, there isn't a ton of family treatment services either. You know, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, NARA has the only residential program where you can bring like your kids with you in the state that I'm aware of. At least that's what I hear. So I think we have. Go ahead, Monta.
I think Letty Owens.
Oh, Lady Owens too. Yeah. Okay, Annalise, I'd just like to ping pong back to you for a quick update from harm reduction.
So in this area of lots of good ideas and needs and not enough money. So the harm reduction committee this month, I think, is going to finish up their proposal for drug checking. So they at this point have talked to every state that has experts working in street drug checking. And they're going to write up a brief that basically has funding options. The settlement board, with kind of this first bucket of funding, if you will, has allocated all but $1 million. So there's not like a ton of money left over, but there's going to be more money coming in. So I say that also to Rep Reynolds and our legislative partners that like we're putting together, you know, evidence emerging harm reduction options for the state at this point. So they'll be looking at drug checking and then moving back into the recommendation to have a statewide strategic plan for naloxone across the state agencies. So we have some staffing work to do there to get ready for that.
Thank you. Last but not least, me with our youth subcommittee. I just want to give Wes a shout out really quick for managing two concurrent sort of processes that we have going. One is really getting some recommendations to the legislature out the door very quickly, which is a separate committee. And the other one is our partnership with SOCAC setting the tone for our longer term strategic planning process. And so good job, Wes. Thanks for setting all that up. We are looking at a rigorous timeline right now to provide the legislature with recommendations around expanding access to youth MOUD treatment. But that is not going to be our only focus point. We're looking at really broadening that and figuring out what is low-hanging fruit, what are initial investments we can make, what are more long-term sort of more complex changes we're going to need to work through. So that's what we're working on there. With the longer-term process and partnership with the System of Care Advisory Council, we are working on building relationships with the youth leadership that are co-facilitating this process. The last session went really, really well. Again, great job, Wes, teeing that all up. And I thought the SOCAC leader, Caleb, also did a really great job. And it was really, you know, a warm felt sort of practical ground setting process. So that's where we're at. You can expect to see more from our group probably, I would imagine, around August, Wes. Does that sound about right for the commission to see a first iteration of our recommendations for the legislature? Cool. And anything that I missed? Okay. Next up, Annalise and Will, I'll kick it back to you to talk about our dashboard, smart sheet,
Sorry.
and
I had another question,
oh,
Tony.
go ahead.
Are those recommendations on youth treatment or youth prevention or both?
We are focused on looking at adolescent, I think into the young adult range. We're still, I think, defining our age bracket, and we're looking at treatment and then recovery support services, and then allowing the prevention group to really spearhead the preventative service goals.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Sorry if feel a little steps behind. Yeah.
Great question. And it's awesome that there's so many people who are so invested in adolescent care right now, and additionally into the preventative space. So we're going to do our job with our group here at the ADPC, but then also try to work a little magic with convening everyone else who's doing their own independent thing.
Awesome.
Yep. Thank you. Okay. So Annalise, I'll pitch it back over to you and Will.
Thanks, Tony. Karina, if you can pull up the slides, and we're going to go to the slides on the July progress report. While Karina's pulling those up, I'll just add that along these lines with this youth collaboration with SOCAC, I think this is the beginning of a really rich relationship for us as a commission that we haven't really had. Like, Wes is excellent and an expert at building relationships with youth. And to the commissioners who sat on it, like, thank you so much for showing up and listening and just like really meaningfully engaging and letting the youth lead. I think that that's not the space we usually operate in at the Alcohol and Drug Policy Commission. So I just think we're at the beginning of what will really bolster our efforts in this area as we move forward across the continuum of care. I think as we go on in this process. So thank you to all of you. So now, turning back to the current strategic plan. So you might remember, I feel like I've been harping on this like every month because I take our statutory deliverables seriously. Karina, you can go to the next slide. Although our statutory plan is 5 years, our comprehensive plan we do is for 5 years. We are required to review and update the plan and provide a report to the legislature by July 1 of each even numbered year on the metrics and other indicators of progress. And for various reasons that didn't happen in 2022, this is the first time this is happening. So it did enable us, though, to really take stock. I know we all have our own thoughts and criticisms of our strategic plan, but we really use this as an opportunity to do a deep dive into what's been done and what hasn't been done in the state. Next slide. Care. So just as a reminder, there's, basically the focus is on 4 impacts, but the first 3 are really the ones we have the most to measure with: prevalence, substance use disorder related deaths, and health disparities. And then there's these 4 goals. And then underneath each goal, there are objectives, outcomes, and strategies. And I put the number in there because if you kind of add it up, there's hundreds of strategies that are in the strategic plan. And most of those don't really track directly back to any kind of quantifiable number. So what we have done is produced I'm trying to see what I have next on the slides here for you guys. So what we've done is we're going to produce kind of 3 work products. One, and I'm going to turn it over to Will in a minute here. Will has been working hard to put together a dashboard that will go live hopefully by July 1 on our website that will allow folks all the time, not just on paper, but be able to go to the website and look at our high level indicators, which are those things that show us that prevalence, the deaths, the disparities. And we can start to build that out eventually, hopefully to a level that we all feel good about, but that's going to get us started there. We also have a smart sheet. So I'll pull up a screenshot of the smart sheet after Will is done that shows all of these hundreds of strategies, what state agencies they're assigned to, and what the status is of them. And now that we have this baseline with the state agencies, we can go back and ask them for more information or to update it. I think all of you in the committees, this is going to give you like a tremendous amount of information to know, okay, did anything happen with that one? We want more information, etc. And then the third piece, we are going to do a brief written report. And I'll get to that a little bit later on and ask for some feedback on what we're recommending we focus on for the next 2 years. So that's kind of the package that we're putting together. None of it, I apologize, is complete today. So I don't have a written draft to send out to you. We don't have the Tableau up yet. We aren't meeting in July, so we'll probably be communicating a lot of this out to folks. And the neat thing about the smart sheet and the data dashboard is that now we're going to have these to use and be able to mold and make them more usable going forward. So with that, we'll start with the strategic plan indicators, and I'll throw it over to Will.
Okay, can we take a look at the next slide? Oh, awesome. Thank you, Karina. I know I sent that last slide at like the last minute, so I really appreciate you getting that in there. Seriously. First, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone involved in the recovery work recently. Monta for leading the committee, for supporting one another. Those of you who spoke today, the people who gave their proposals at the settlement board. It's really been a pleasure to be part of this community. So thank you. I will move on to, okay, so just a reminder, we track 4 impacts as part of our strategic plan. And this progress report is a report on how these indicators have changed between more or less the beginning of the plan and now. And so we've been over all this data in the past. I think we've covered just about everything in this dashboard in one commission meeting or another. And I don't think there are any surprises here. So I don't want to spend a ton of time on the data itself, but more just how we're going to present this in our report on July 1st. That said, I'm always happy to talk outside the meeting about any of these data points. Okay, next slide. All right, so we want to be very transparent here. We want our data to be accessible at any time to all of the commissioners, anyone interested in our work. So for that reason, we're going to create a dashboard to roll out with this progress report that we're working on. So I sort of think about this as accomplishing 2 tasks. One is to provide a short summary of each of the 4 impacts in this dashboard, like sort of like a 30-second version. I want a crash course on impact number 1. Here are like 2 charts, and maybe a paragraph or 2 of info. And we do that for each of the impacts. And then the second thing I think we can accomplish with this dashboard is just to be a place for all of our data to sit, not necessarily in a narrative form, but sort of like in a table type form. And I'll get into that in a second. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is just kind of like what the dashboard will look like. The homepage won't look exactly like that. We'll have some, like an ADPC logo, some narrative about, putting this in context, some links to like the strategic plan, the smart sheet Annalise is going to share and stuff like that, just to set the stage for like this story, because this dashboard is supposed to be the story of, substance use in our state. Or as it is identified in the strategic plan. I want to add that like this is going to be under constant improvement. This is version like 1.0, I think, as Annalise says, and we're just going to keep going with it as we want to, as we identify changes that might need to be made, get some more input. And so I also want to kind of open it up. If any commissioners are interested in taking a look at this with me, feel free to let me know in the chat, and we can set something up. Okay, where am I at now? Right, so you see the upper navigation bar. Right now it's like darkened on strategic plan, and then you have impact 1, 2, 3, 4, and then our full data tabs will be beyond that. So you're able to sort of click through this navigation. And so yeah, Karina, if you could go next slide here. So if you clicked on that impact 1 tab, I did a screenshot of like, well, what fit on the slide. So this is what would come up if you looked at strategic plan impact 1 and you just wanted like a quick, what's going on sort of thing. You'd find if you read through this that 21.9% of Oregonians 12 and over have a substance use disorder. That was in 2022. And then you'd read on that this figure has increased since the plan began. So that's impact 1, and there's like 2 charts down there too. They kind of got cut off. Karina, can you go to the next slide? Okay, thanks. And then same for strategic plan impact 2. The goal to reduce alcohol and drug-related deaths, which is of course not what has happened. And so we have 3 and 4 also, but I'm not going to go through those today. Let's see here. Next slide, please. Okay, and so this is like just like a navigation tab, and you'll have the 4 impact measure buttons there. And when you click on one of those, it's going to go to like the full data page for that measure. And something I should say here is I showed that first impact 1 tab, which had maybe like 3 or 4 numbers on it, right? Like 3 or 4 measures. But for impact 1, if you look at the actual strategic plan, I think there are like 17 measures attached to that. So like anytime we have a presentation on impact 1, we're not going to see most of the data that's behind it. We're picking and choosing what we think are the most important points to tell the story. But we also want to leave it open to others who might think other data points are more or equally important or just want to learn about those. So we're going to put those all in one spot. Yeah, so next slide, please. Yep, go ahead. And if you were to click on that first button, the measure 1, impact 1 measures, it pulls up a page with all the data for strategic plans, what it identified for tracking measures for impact 1. And so this also got cut off, in practice, this is going to like live on the ADPC website, and you'd have to scroll up and down to check out which measures you're interested in. And so there will be a similar page for each of those impacts. And the idea is also to sort of make it as interactive as possible. Like at the top there, you say decrease the share of Oregonians with a SUD. Like, okay, well, maybe if you wanted to know a little bit more about methodology or where it comes from or what a SUD means, we could have like a hover over with info for that, or like an expansion box that brings you to, that info. See if there's anything else I wanted to mention here. Well, yeah, so we expect to put this on the ADPC website along with the progress report. And really, if you have any questions or comments, let me know, or you want to be involved in any way or anything. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, Debbie.
So we've tried.
Hey, any ideas about how we can get better participation from the schools, specifically on the youth data? I know that's, which, I mean, if all of a sudden we get one of the largest school districts who in the past hasn't participated and all of a sudden they do,
You're talking
Yeah,
student
the
health
baseline
surveys?
data or how we compare to that?
Yeah, student health survey data, I'm guessing. Yeah. And so, yeah, there's going to have to be methodology like attached to each of those data points, right? Because I think a lot of us on this call know that certain things happen in reporting and responses and surveys like that. And we need to be clear about that. Yes, yes. We know that those issues exist, and we will do our best to communicate them for sure.
Wes, did you want to add anything to that? Not to put you on the spot, but I know you have thoughts too.
Oh, just Debbie, HB 2656 passed in 2023. And that will require school districts to at least offer the survey to their students. So that will be a big incentive that they will be required. As well as pushing that into a annual survey administration. So that might be helpful in making those results more robust.
Yeah, thanks, Wes. And then, right, so we're getting more robust results, and then that means there might be issues comparing them to previous results, which weren't as robust. And so that's sort of why we have to, continuously work at trying to reconcile those.
Are there any other questions? And if there aren't questions about the data, I can move on to the smart sheet and the report. Okay, let's do that. And folks can ask more questions at the end as well. Karina, can you bring the spreadsheet back up, please? So in addition to the data dashboard, we will be publicly sharing a link to this smart sheet. And this is just a screenshot of one piece of pages and pages. Shout out to Tori Algie, who spent, I don't even know how many dozens of hours putting this together. I will just say this is why the next strategic plan, we're going to start with something like this and not put it together later. There's definitely, here's what I'll say about the smart sheet. There's some takeaways that we're going to have to think about. There's a number of strategies that the assigned agencies have come back and said that's actually not within our role. So I think on the front end of the current strategic plan, while the state agencies helped put it together, once it was put together and they assigned them out to state agencies, that wasn't done in a collaborative fashion. So we have a handful of strategies that we need to now take a look at and say, okay, can these still be done by another agency or by tweaking them, or are they just not important? There's also, and you can see this on this slide in particular, there's a number of things that are ours as the Alcohol and Drug Policy Commission that we quite frankly just haven't done yet. And so, we've talked about it. Can you go to the next slide, Karina? So this smart sheet will be out there. Committees can look at it. You all can look at it. We can ask follow-up questions, et cetera. It will be live and agencies can go in and, change their response, add to their response. So for the written report, it's going to be pretty short. We don't anticipate we don't have time, quite frankly, to write something very extensive. So it's going to summarize the indicators. We're going to summarize the progress that we've made as a state. I do think it's a good opportunity for us to point out that, yes, although the indicators show that things are in many ways getting worse. I don't know, Will, that we have any indicators that have actually gotten better. But there are many activities that agencies have been engaging in, particularly all the things we did as a state, particularly through OHA, with the one-time federal funding for workforce, the the housing, right? Like there have been so many investments made that we can highlight those activities. So that'll be the bulk of the report, and then our recommendations for what we do for the next year and a half of this current strategic plan while we're putting together the next strategic plan. So we came up with, I think it's 3 recommendations. Next slide. So what I'd like to propose to you all today, and if you want to think about it and get back to me, I think we've got plenty of time for a discussion now, though, if folks have other thoughts. Our recommendation is that, and again, it's just the next year and a half, that we focus on 1, continuing to implement our recommendations to reduce deaths related to overdose. We've moved funding forward on quite a few of those, but most of that's going to take additional work and implementation and follow-up. Number 2, for us to act on the strategies that are assigned to the ADPC, so the things that are within our control, which are along the lines of, data, pulling together a cross-agency data group, bringing together the state agencies on a quarterly basis and getting us into that mechanism of oversight and implementation. And then the final is to focus on agency collaboration and accountability. So just really focusing on what's on our power and breaking down the silos between the agencies so we can start to really identify where there's duplication or where we can foster collaboration to put forward strategies in a stronger manner. So those are the 3 recommendations we'd like to put into the report. Do folks have feedback, comments, concerns? Jill put in the chat, totally support. Thank you, Jill.
Yeah, it looks good to me as well. I did have one question, and maybe Jill can help answer this. If I remember right, the CCOs will be like updating their plan or something, I think, over the next year. And I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for the ADPC to weigh in on that at all.
I think if you're talking about the re-procurement, we have the next 2 years for like the state to develop like what the new round of CCO contracts will look like for the next 5 years. I'm sure there will be opportunities to weigh in. I know Rep Nose has convened a table. I don't know, Annalise, if you're on that, but I think the Oregon Health Policy Board will probably be weighing in on that. So I think there will be opportunity for sure.
Okay, thanks, Jill. Please keep us apprised on how we might participate.
And I think that's a good call out, Tony. If folks have other things like that, that we could say, just making sure that we're taking, that the ADPC is involved in any major structural, contractual changes in the state as it might relate to substance use disorder. So it looks like there's some questions on the dashboard. Why don't we go ahead and take the slides down for now? And if folks want, we can bring them back up.
Okay. I'm trying to find the first question.
My question, Will, was
who
do we anticipate might be the biggest user or our audience of the dashboard? Like when we think about defining terms and putting stuff on the dashboard, do we have an idea of who might be the biggest users of the dashboard?
My thought when I'm working on data products is almost always like, what would the commissioners like to see? Like the commissioners are my first thought, right? And also agencies. I sort of get like ad hoc requests, right, for data requests and stuff from all sorts of people, commissioners, committee members, agencies, and stuff like that. And a lot of that data does sort of sit in our strategic plan measurements in one way or another. And so I just, from my perspective, if I could steer those people towards a dashboard like this, it would be great for them and for us too. And also, I just want to open this up to Annalise and Wes, and also, what do you guys see?
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, the audience for this July report is the legislature and the governor. Now, do I expect the legislature, no offense, Representative Reynolds, to like go and look at our dashboard all the time? No, but your staff will and legislative staff will. I think it's also the beginning of us starting to have a living how do I say this? Like living metrics, right? That we can start to build on. So when we all say, so I know like Debbie, like her feedback on prevention, it's all in one place now and we can go to it. My first question to Will was, so like eventually this is going to be county by county data, right? So, right, like this is the beginning of something that will live on in perpetuity, that 4 years from now, we can go back and see, okay, here's what we're doing, and it's all in one place, and it's not stale paper data that nobody uses.
Yeah, thanks, Annalise. I should have said yes, the legislature for this report, of course. That's what this, but yeah, like you were saying, I think what I was getting at was further on down the road, as this sits on the site a while and is continuously updated, and this living thing. Is there a clear connection to this dashboard and our former strategic plan? The answer is, well, it is connected to the 2020-2025 strategic plan directly through the indicators that were identified by that planning committee for that strategic plan. Okay, I think that covered it. Anything else?
Moxie.
Hi, thanks. One of my main concerns about the way we look at Oregon tends to be the use of epidemiology. So when we look at rates of disease or disease-related events like drug overdose or the prevalence of opioid use disorder, alcohol use disorder, those rates are traditionally calculated per 100,000 members of the population. So when we look at rural and frontier counties, those numbers get less and less reliable. So a minor increase in the number of overdose deaths, like 3 or 4 more people die in 1 year in a rural county, that makes it look like the rate in that county is going way up over the past few years. So I just wonder, how do we make use of rates in a way that's accurate? Because when we look at like Multnomah County, Washington County, and the metro areas along I-5, population rates are really useful. But then outside of the I-5 corridor, it becomes really complex, and we may actually direct funds in areas that don't need them as much because the statistics can be misused. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's a lot of some of the work we've been doing with our committees right now, is trying to make some sense out of overdose events, including, death rates, more so than hospitalization and emergency department, which we've been working with all of those. But trying to make some sense of those at, with the smaller counties. And there's nothing perfect about it. It's difficult to do. One thing we do have in place is that one of the standards is that if there are less than 20 events in a particular county, then we won't calculate a rate for that county, because that's just acknowledging that it is not reliable, and we shouldn't be making decisions with that. And then we won't publish a total figure if it's 5 or less. And so that kind of gives us a little something to work with. Unfortunately, that excludes all kinds of counties that do have, events with a count of less than 20. And so really, I should say this is where local knowledge comes into, and we have to paint a picture and work with communities, have one-on-one conversations about what they see going on there before we present a story based on some, like you're saying, rates that are unreliable. So yeah, it comes down to those relationships too, not just the data. Yeah, Maxie.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that we know that as a whole in rural areas, the overdose rates, I believe, have gone up over the past, I think maybe several years, by 300% compared to roughly 200% or so in urban areas. So the rates are increasing more steeply in rural areas as a whole nationally. So there's a dire need in rural areas. I don't want to undercut that idea or make it sound like it's undetectable. So if I can find those exact numbers, I'll share it with you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Well, and just to tie into what you were just saying, we look at the counties in the presentation at the start of the meeting that received funding for recovery centers. Many of those are in those rural counties. So hopefully that's going to help some.
So if folks don't have other feedback, all we have remaining on our agenda is public comments.
And I do remember, Annalise, seeing something in the chat that you shared with someone that this was going to be the time. So if that individual is still here with us and would like to share, we'd love to hear you.
I think she posted that she was going to hop off. Yes. And I don't see her. Karina, did anybody else message you for a public comment?
No, ma'am.
Woohoo.
Well, Annalise, as you kind of noted, if that looks like where we're at, great job on being condensing and giving us a great meeting. Unless there's any other comments, we can adjourn and wish everybody a happy July and keep up the great work, and we'll see you in August.
Thank you all.